Welcome to your deep dive for today. We're going to be looking at something that you encounter every single day, the power of bad.
Hmm.
It might sound a little strange, but there's this fascinating psychological principle at play here,
Mm-hmm.
the idea that bad is stronger than good.
Right.
And we're going to be drawing from an academic article, also titled "Bad is Stronger Than Good,"
Okay.
which has some pretty mind-blowing findings that I think you'll want to hear about.
Yeah, it's one of those ideas that once you hear it, you start to see it kind of everywhere.
Yeah.
And the article really dives deep into how negative events and experiences and even just information tends to stick with us
Yeah.
more than the positive stuff.
Okay. So let's unpack this whole bad is stronger than good thing.
Sure.
Where does this idea even come from?
Well, let's rewind way back
Okay.
to our ancestors on the savannah.
Okay.
Imagine you're walking along
Yeah.
and you see some rustling in the grass.
Okay.
It could be something harmless,
Yeah, right.
even something good,
Hmm.
like a tasty animal you can hunt.
Uh,
But it could also be
Yeah.
a lion about to pounce.
oh.
Which one do you think your ancestors paid more attention to?
I'm guessing not the tasty animal.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Our ancestors who were more attuned to threats,
Right.
to the bad,
Hmm.
were the ones who survived
Right.
to pass on their genes.
Makes sense.
Ignoring a potential positive outcome might lead to regret,
Sure.
sure, but ignoring a danger could mean you're off the menu,
Right.
literally.
Yeah.
So from an evolutionary perspective,
Yeah.
we're literally wired to react more strongly to the negative.
Right.
It kept us alive.
So that makes a lot of sense. But how does this ancient wiring play out in our modern lives?
Well, let's start with relationships.
Okay.
Think about it.
Mm.
Have you ever noticed how a single argument with your partner
Yeah.
can overshadow a whole day
Yeah.
of otherwise positive interactions?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's like that one fight just hangs in the air,
Yeah.
even if everything else was great.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's the power of bad at work. Researchers John Gottman and Robert Levinson actually studied this
Okay.
by observing couples' interactions.
Right.
And they found that negative interactions, especially those where negative emotions are reciprocated,
Yeah.
were far more predictive
Okay.
of relationship problems
Right.
and even divorce
Mm.
than positive interactions were of happy marriages.
Wow. So it's not just a feeling, it's actually backed by science.
Yeah.
It sounds like avoiding negativity in relationships is even more important than piling on the positivity.
You've hit the nail on the head.
Okay.
It's not that positive interactions don't matter,
Right.
but their impact just doesn't seem to be as strong or as lasting. This bad is stronger than good principle applies to learning too.
Really?
Yeah.
I always thought positive reinforcement was the key to learning, like rewarding good behavior with gold stars or treats.
Right.
Are you saying that's not the best way to learn?
Well, it's not that simple.
Okay.
While positive reinforcement does have its place,
Right.
research has shown that punishment can actually be more effective
Okay.
in certain learning situations.
Really?
Yeah, for instance, several studies from the 1960s,
Okay.
like those by Penny and Lupton and by Spence,
Okay.
focused on what's called discriminative learning,
Hmm.
where people had to learn to respond differently to different stimuli.
Right.
And what they found was that punishment for incorrect responses
Okay.
actually led to faster
Really?
and more accurate learning
Wow.
than rewards for correct responses.
So being told you're wrong actually helps you learn faster than being told you're right.
Yeah.
That's kind of counterintuitive.
It is, but it goes back to that ancient wiring we talked about.
Right.
Remember loss aversion. We humans are more motivated to avoid losing something
Right.
than we are to gain something of equal value.
Yeah.
It's as if we experience the pain of a loss
Yeah.
more intensely than the pleasure of a gain.
I'm starting to see the pattern here. This bad is stronger idea seems to be popping up everywhere.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it even impacts how we process emotions and memories. You ready for another deep dive?
Okay.
All right.
Okay, I'm ready to dive deeper. Emotions and memories. What's the connection to bad being stronger?
Well, think about this.
Okay.
Which types of memories do you think are more vivid and long-lasting?
Okay.
Those associated with happy, joyful experiences, or those tied to negative, perhaps even traumatic events?
Honestly, the negative ones definitely stick with me more. Like,
Right.
I can still remember embarrassing moments from years ago in excruciating detail,
Yeah.
but I struggle to recall, like, specific compliments
Right.
with the same level of clarity. It's almost like my brain decided those embarrassing moments were VIPs
Right.
and gave them front row seats in my memory.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And it's not just you.
Okay.
Research shows that negative emotions
Mm-hmm.
are generally more intense, more memorable,
Yeah.
and more attention-grabbing
Yeah.
than positive ones.
Okay.
This is partly because negative emotions
Mm.
often trigger a stronger physiological response.
Okay.
Our heart rate might increase,
Right.
our breathing might quicken,
Yeah.
and our stress hormones surge.
Mm.
All things that help us remember those experiences.
So it's like our bodies are also trying to make sure we don't forget the bad stuff.
Yeah.
But why do we need to remember negative experiences so vividly? Wouldn't it be nicer to just focus on the good times?
You'd think so, right?
Yeah.
But from an evolutionary perspective,
Mm.
remembering negative experiences can be crucial for survival.
Right.
If you touch a hot stove and burn yourself,
You need to remember that pain
right?
to avoid making the same mistake again.
Yeah, for sure.
Remembering negative social interactions
Mm.
can help us navigate complex social situations
Yeah.
and avoid potential threats or harm.
So remembering the bad is like a built-in warning system,
Exactly.
helping us avoid danger and make better choices in the future.
It's like our brain is constantly saying, hey, remember that time this happened? Let's not do that again.
Right, right.
And this tendency to focus on and remember the negative extends even further,
Okay.
impacting how we form impressions of others. Have you ever noticed how a single negative piece of information about someone
Yeah.
can drastically change your opinion of them,
Yeah.
even if you've heard tons of positive things before?
Yeah, it's like that one negative detail just overrides everything else.
Right.
Why is that?
Researchers call this the negativity bias, and it's been demonstrated in numerous studies.
Okay.
For example, back in 1965.
A researcher named Norman Anderson
Okay.
did a fascinating study
Right.
where he presented participants with lists of traits
Right.
describing hypothetical people.
Mm.
He found that negative information
Okay.
had a much stronger impact on participants' overall impressions
Right.
of those individuals
Mm-hmm.
than positive information.
So first impressions really do matter,
Yeah,
and it seems like negative first impressions matter even more.
exactly.
But we don't just form impressions of others,
Right.
we also form impressions of ourselves.
Hmm.
Does this negativity bias play a role in how we see ourselves too?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Even when it comes to our self-concept,
Mm.
which is generally positive,
Yeah.
we're more influenced by the desire to avoid negative self-views
Okay.
than to gain positive ones.
Interesting.
It's like we're more afraid of being seen as bad
Yeah.
or incompetent
Right.
than we are driven to be seen as good or successful.
That's so interesting. So even though we might strive for self-improvement.
You know, we're actually more motivated by the fear of failure
Right.
than the desire for success.
It seems that way.
Okay.
One of the ways this manifests is through something called self-handicapping.
Oh, okay.
It's this sneaky little trick our minds play,
Okay.
where we create obstacles for ourselves
Right.
to protect our egos in case of failure.
Oh, I totally do that.
Right.
Like if I have a big presentation coming up,
Yeah.
I might procrastinate on preparing,
Yeah.
then tell myself, well, I didn't do well because I didn't have enough time to practice.
Right.
It's like I'm giving myself a built-in excuse
Exactly.
to avoid feeling bad about not being perfect.
That's a classic example of self-handicapping.
Okay.
And research shows that we're more likely to engage in self-handicapping behaviors when we're trying to avoid a negative outcome
Okay.
than when we're aiming for an exceptionally positive one.
Right.
It's all about protecting ourselves from that sting of negative self-judgment. So even in our self-perceptions,
Yeah.
the bad seems to hold more weight.
Yeah.
It's almost as if we're wired to be our own worst critics.
In a way, yes. But it's important to remember that this negativity bias
Right.
is not inherently a bad thing.
Okay.
It's part of our evolutionary heritage,
Mm-hmm.
and it can be adaptive in many ways.
That's a good point. But if we're so attuned to the negative,
Mm-hmm.
how do we avoid getting bogged down by it? It's
Right.
starting to feel like bad is winning.
Yeah.
Don't we need some good news here?
You're right. It can feel overwhelming to think about how powerful negativity can be.
Yeah.
But remember,
Hmm.
understanding this bias is the first step toward counteracting it.
Okay.
And there are things we can do to make sure good gets its fair share of attention.
Tell me more. How do we shift the balance?
One powerful strategy is to consciously cultivate positive experiences
Okay.
and savor them,
Hmm.
instead of letting those good moments slip away. We can take the time to really appreciate them,
Right.
to commit them to memory,
Mm.
and to let them sink in.
Right.
It's like creating a mental photo album of positive experiences that we can revisit when we need a boost.
That sounds great in theory.
Yeah.
But in the real world, it's easy to get caught up in the daily grind and let those positive moments pass us by.
Right.
How do we make this a habit?
It takes effort,
Okay.
but even small changes can make a big difference.
Hmm.
One simple practice is to start a gratitude journal.
Okay.
Take a few minutes each day to write down 3 things you're grateful for.
Okay.
They can be big or small,
Right.
simple or profound. It could be something as simple as a delicious cup of coffee,
Yeah.
a beautiful sunset, or a kind gesture from a stranger.
I've heard about gratitude journals, but I always thought they were a bit cheesy.
Right.
Do they really work?
The research suggests they do.
Okay.
Studies have shown that practicing gratitude can increase happiness,
Right.
reduce stress, and even improve physical health.
Really?
Yeah. It helps us shift our attention to the positive
Right.
and appreciate the good things in our lives, which can counteract that negativity bias.
So by actively focusing on the good,
Yeah.
we can actually retrain our brains to give it more weight.
Exactly. It's like building up a reserve of positivity
Okay.
to counteract the weight of those inevitable negative experiences.
Right.
And remember, this negativity bias extends to how we process information and feedback too.
So how do we deal with negative feedback without letting it completely derail us?
Well, first, it's important to remember that not all feedback is created equal. Some feedback is constructive and helpful,
Okay.
even if it's delivered in a way that feels negative.
Right.
Other feedback might be more about the other person's perspective or emotional state than about our actual performance.
So we need to learn to discern between helpful criticism and feedback that's not worth dwelling on.
Exactly.
Okay.
And when you receive feedback, try to focus on the specific behaviors or actions being discussed rather than taking it as a personal attack.
Right.
Ask clarifying questions.
Yeah.
Try to understand the other person's perspective.
Right.
And look for the nuggets of truth that you can use to improve.
This is good stuff. I'm starting to feel more empowered to deal with the bad in my life.
Good.
But there's one thing I'm still wondering about. If bad is stronger than good, is so ingrained in us,
Yeah.
how do we explain the fact that most people are generally happy and report feeling satisfied with their lives?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And it brings us to one of the most fascinating paradoxes of human psychology. Even though negative experiences might hit us harder,
Right.
the fear of losing the good things in our lives can be an incredibly powerful motivator.
Okay.
It's like that old saying, you don't know what you've got till it's gone.
So in a way, the very fact that bad is stronger can actually drive us to protect and appreciate the good even more.
Exactly. Think about it. We might not dwell on compliments as much as criticisms,
Right.
but the desire to avoid future criticism can make us work harder to improve. We might not always savor those quiet moments of happiness,
Right.
but the fear of losing them can motivate us to create more of them.
It's like we're constantly striving to maintain what we have to avoid slipping backwards.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And this is where the power of understanding this principle comes in.
Okay.
If we're aware of this negativity bias, we can consciously counteract it. We can choose to savor positive experiences,
Right.
to express gratitude more often, and to actively cultivate positive relationships and environments.
So it's not about ignoring the bad, but rather about not letting it dominate our
That's right.
perceptions and our actions.
Precisely. Now, ready to explore how this plays out in even more areas of our lives.
I'm ready to keep going. It's amazing how this bad is stronger than good idea seems to be woven into so many aspects of life. What else is there?
Well, let's talk about child development.
Okay.
It's one of those areas where We tend to assume that positive experiences are the most impactful,
Right.
but even the research suggests that bad can actually be stronger.
Wait, are you saying that all those parenting books that emphasize positive reinforcement and creating a nurturing environment
Hmm.
might be missing the bigger picture?
Not necessarily wrong,
Okay.
but perhaps incomplete.
Okay.
Remember those studies on learning we talked about earlier?
Yeah.
The ones that showed punishment could be more effective than reward
Uh-huh.
in certain situations?
Yeah.
Well, similar patterns have emerged in studies of child development,
Hmm.
while a loving and supportive environment is undeniably crucial. Research has shown that negative parenting,
Mm.
things like harsh discipline neglect or emotional unavailability,
Okay.
can have a more profound and lasting impact on a child's development
Wow.
than positive parenting practices.
Wow, that's heavy stuff. So it's not that positive parenting doesn't matter,
Right.
but its impact might be overshadowed by the potential harm of negative parenting.
Yeah.
It seems kind of counterintuitive to everything we're told about raising kids.
It's a complex issue,
Right.
and there are many factors involved.
Mm.
But the research really highlights the importance of understanding the full spectrum of influences on child development.
Mm.
It's not just about what we do as parents,
Yeah.
but also about what we avoid doing.
That makes sense. It's like those studies that found that growing up in poverty
Mhm.
can have a significant negative impact on a child's cognitive development,
Yeah.
even if they have good genes.
Right.
And on the flip side,
Mm.
simply providing a wealthy and supportive environment
Right.
doesn't necessarily guarantee a child will reach their full intellectual potential.
That's a powerful example of how bad can sometimes overpower good,
Right.
even when it comes to something as fundamental as cognitive ability.
Hmm.
It underscores the need for a more nuanced and holistic approach to child development,
Yeah.
one that acknowledges the weight of negative experiences
Right.
while also emphasizing the importance of creating positive and supportive environments.
This has been such a thought-provoking deep dive.
Good.
It's definitely given me a lot to ponder, especially as a parent.
I'm glad to hear that,
Yeah.
and I hope it's given our listeners some food for thought as well.
I think it has. So as we wrap up this deep dive into the power of bad, here's a final thought for you to chew on.
Okay.
Knowing that bad experiences and information can have such a strong hold on us,
Right.
how might you change your approach to your daily life, your relationships, or even your work to counteract that negativity bias
Oh, yes.
and create a more positive and fulfilling experience?
That's a great question. And it reminds us that even though bad might be stronger in some ways, we have the power to choose how we respond to it
Right.
and to cultivate more good in our lives.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep.